Hello, and thank you for joining us for the first in our 4-week educational cybersecurity webinar series. NBT's Chief Credit and Risk Officer, Amy Wiles, will kick off our webinar today, followed by our feature presentation. At this time, I'll turn the program over to Amy.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be welcoming everyone to our first webinar in our virtual cybersecurity series. It's such an important topic as cybersecurity comes up so often in the headlines. The Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell on 60 Minutes just last Sunday talked about cybersecurity as the thing that poses the biggest threat to the US economy, even greater than the 2008 financial crisis. And it's no longer just financial institutions who are the primary targets. It's all of our commercial customers, individuals, not-for-profits. Anywhere there's a perception of vulnerability and money to be gained, it will be tested and exploited. Our teams have been working really hard to put together the latest information on all facets of addressing cyber threats and are going to share this knowledge with you in our series over the coming weeks. At the conclusion of the series, you will have learned not only why and how cyber criminals are targeting your business for financial gain, but also some of the key practices for threat prevention and response. Today, our Director of Information Security, Tara Carnwright-Granata, and Information Security Manager, Andrew Frisbee, will get us started with their experienced insights into some of the most common threats we've been seeing fraudsters take advantage of, such as business email compromise and ransomware. Tara leads the NBT's information security, cybersecurity, fraud, third-party risk, and business continuity programs. It's a big job. For the last 13 years, she's provided strategic and operational leadership, setting our policies, practices, and standards in the complex threat and regulatory environments of financial services, which has been amplified over the past year due to the global pandemic. At NBT, our priority is protecting customer information and ensuring data privacy and security. Over the last 23 years, Andy's had technical and leadership positions in information technology, law enforcement, consulting, and now financial services. His cyber risk management expertise includes insider threat investigations, computer forensic expert witness testimony, cybersecurity program development, and incident response. Andy is a key member of the Information Security and Fraud Risk Division at NBT. So Tara and Andy, thank you for joining us today and sharing your expertise. And now I'll turn it over to Tara.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Very excited to kick off this 4-week series. In this short kickoff, in the next 30 minutes, we're going to cover the current state of cybersecurity, what some of those common threats are, and a 5-step simple action plan that you can take away today to start protecting your business. So I'm going to move into the state of cybersecurity, what we're seeing out there today. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. And that's a pretty important number because while our employees may not mean to cause disruption to the business, it can happen so easily and very quickly. Ransomware is our #1 most disruptive threat in 2020. And we're going to give you some more details on ransomware later, but its powerful attack can cause major disruption to a business. And 52% of consumers report that they use the same password for multiple accounts. This is so very important that we're including our employees to change their passwords and they're not using those same passwords for their email applications, for online banking applications, and that we're making sure our employees are changing those passwords frequently. The average cost per stolen record is right around $242 a client or customer. So I want you to think to yourself as we go through and talk about these threats, how many customer records or client records you as a business could be responsible for if you were to suffer a breach. And then $1.7 billion in confirmed losses from BEC, that's 41% of all reported cybercrime. And reported is a key word because those losses are probably a lot more, as most businesses do not report this cybercrime. And then lastly, as Amy mentioned, cyber attacks are the #1 problem with mankind today. We want you to take away this knowledge that we're going to provide to you today, and I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to cover some of the common threats we're seeing.
Thanks, Tara. That was a great overview of the state of affairs. I'm really excited to be here today and able to share with you some really critical information about cybersecurity. It's such a critical topic for your businesses. What we're going to cover today are the common threats that are in NBT's footprint and really around the nation. We're going to talk about those threats in two separate buckets. First, we're going to talk about the most common threats that are used by attackers to gain access to your environments. And in that bucket, we're going to talk about credential stuffing and what that is. We're going to talk about exploitable remote services and what that is. And we're going to talk about spear phishing and how they leverage that technique. And then the result of those threats are the second bucket of issues that we're going to talk about, and that are the attacks that really cause financial impact and disruption to your businesses, and that's ransomware and business email compromise. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about who we are talking about, and I want to put this in context. So the cybercrime groups and the threat actors out there who are backed by nation states are really sophisticated groups and organized groups. They have funding, they have teams of people, they have organization, and they have depth. And so that's in contrast to sometimes what gets painted, of a typical cyber attacker, maybe somebody who's a younger person just getting into the world of cybercrime. That is not who we're talking about today. We're talking about the organized teams of people and groups that are backed by nation states that are targeting your businesses. So to put that in context, I want to show you kind of where we place ransomware and BEC in the cybercrime pain scale. And while I'm talking about that, I also want you to think about what it was like if your business had already experienced a cyber attack, or maybe you haven't, but you're worried about it. Where would your frame of mind be on the cybercrime pain scale? We consider ransomware and BEC to be at that extreme end of the cybercrime pain scale, mainly because they're the most disruptive and most costly of the cyber attacks that are prevalent in today's world. So let's get right into credential stuffing. Credential stuffing is a really common technique that's used to gain access to your environment. You really need to understand it at a high level so that you can start to build a program around protecting against it. And credential stuffing is really composed of two parts. First, the attackers need to get their hands on usernames and passwords. And I'm not talking about one or two usernames and passwords. I'm talking about mass quantities of usernames and passwords on the order of hundreds of thousands or millions that in the form of lists. And they don't get these lists of usernames and passwords legally. They're stolen lists. Once they have that data, then they feed that information to bots, or botnets they're called. And what bots are really are a compromised network of computers around the globe that are controlled by these cybercrime groups. They can't, as you can imagine, enter username and passwords into your Microsoft 365 system one at a time. Really would not be that efficient and would not be that economical. So they use these botnets to automate that process. And they test all these stolen credentials against your Microsoft 365 email system or other websites with login pages until they have success. Once they have success, they hand that off to a human for the hands-on keyboard attack phase. Now, how successful is this? Well, one research firm has estimated that this attack is anywhere from 0.5% to 2% successful. Now, that's a great number when you're talking about millions and millions of stolen username and password combinations. Remember, they only need one to work. We have to defend against all of those scenarios. I also want to comment that these groups may be broken down into different functions. So the group that actually gains access to your network might not be the group that affects the ransomware attack or the BEC attack. That's how organized they are. So how do they get these credentials? Well, as I said before, these credentials are stolen. And there's a website that does a great job of tracking where these stolen username and passwords are coming from. It's called Have I Been Pawned, and it's run by a gentleman named Troy Hunt out of Australia. And so he tracks all the breaches that occur around the globe. And these username and passwords are available on the dark web, on the black market, for these cybercrime groups to purchase. What I have up on the screen here is actually a personal email account of mine that I used for a number of years. And you can see that this website, Have I Been Pawned, is showing that my email account has been observed in eight prior breaches. What does that mean? That means that my username and password was stolen in the services that I had entered into. Might have been LinkedIn, might have been some other service, but that's happened 8 times. Now, I don't reuse my passwords. I use unique passwords for every service online. Therefore, if a bad guy compromised my account, they're not going to get access to anything else. But they rely on human fallibility here, and they rely on the fact that you reuse your password across multiple accounts, including your corporate account. That's that 0.5% to 2% success rate. They take a stolen password and they're successful with it somewhere else. So what about you? Well, when I pulled this data on February 25th, there was 10.5 billion compromised accounts, username and password combinations tracked on this website. So I would encourage you to go here and enter your corporate email and see how many times it's been compromised. These get compromised because all of us use corporate email accounts and other email accounts on multiple sites. The key there is you don't want to reuse your password. Next, I want to talk to you about exploitable remote services. This is a little more complex, but it's such a risk that we felt it was worth talking about today. So what are remote services? First of all, remote services come in the form, in this example, of remote desktop protocol, which is sort of baked into the Microsoft Windows operating system. And when you're using remote desktop protocol, it allows you to see the desktop of the remote computer as if you were standing or sitting at the keyboard. It's a great service. However, it was never intended to be exposed to the internet. We all know how difficult 2020 was with the pandemic. But what happened during the pandemic was it forced all of us to move from sort of a centralized office location to a work from home scenario. And with that, businesses rushed to provide remote access to their employees, and many of them not realizing that exposing remote desktop protocol to the internet actually increased their attack surface and created substantial risk for their businesses. Well, how do we know this? Well, there's a company out there called Shodan that essentially is the search engine for all things online, and it tracks all computers that are exposed on the internet around the globe. And that service has shown a significant increase in exposed computers enabling remote desktop protocol throughout the pandemic. So the trend is upward. To make matters worse, 8% of those devices are still exposed to old vulnerabilities like BlueKeep. Well, we don't need to get into the details about BlueKeep, but what you need to know about that is that was a vulnerability in remote desktop protocol that enabled attackers to gain direct access to your network without having to log in. What that tells us is that businesses are not keeping up with patching old vulnerabilities. In fact, there is a data out there that supports this assertion. The most common vulnerabilities that are exploited by attackers today are actually vulnerabilities from 2017, 2018, and 2019. So at the end of this presentation, Tara is going to give you an action plan, and I'm going to set the foundation for that action plan right now. But you need to take care of your old vulnerabilities because that is the low-hanging fruit that the attackers are using. I'm going to turn it back over to Tara now to talk to you about spear phishing.
Thanks, Andy. So the third common threat we see out there is spear phishing. And it's a little bit different than your typical phishing, where they're actually targeting a specific person or a group. As Andy mentioned, these are criminal organizations. They are out scouring social media, and they're specifically looking for individuals that have financial ability to send money out the door. And these phishing will come in a manner that it's going to make it look like it looks like Office 365, where it could be credential harvesting and looking for usernames and passwords. It could be an email that looks like it's coming from your CEO and wants you to send money out the door. In all of these situations, they're going to prey on your human emotion to trust, be curious, maybe even have a sense of fear, or in a need to help someone. This fraudster is always looking for quick and thoughtful reaction. And most of the time, this spear phishing is going to result in a business email compromise. So we're going to move into what exactly is a business email compromise attack. This is an impersonation attack. This is where the fraudster will impersonate a certain individual. It will look like it's coming from someone you know and someone you trust. There's two different ways by which a business email could take place. You could be that employee where your account is taken over. You've fallen victim to a phish, you've given your username and password, or it's been compromised previously, and they use your account to try to get financial gain. Or you could be here in the second one, and you could be that individual that gets that email that's requesting money to go to a new account number, maybe via gift cards, or a wire out to someone new completely. That cyber criminal will then receive the money, and those profits will go out to money mules across all of the globe. So now let's look at it from the fraudster side. How do they get in? How do they access? Well, that access is going to come from a phish, a spear phish, or credential stuffing that Andy covered previously. They're actually going to log in. Most of the time, what we see are Office 365 cloud accounts. They are able to get in with those compromised credentials, and they actually physically can read every single email that's in that inbox. They will then direct emails out, most of the time in mass quantities, 200 to 500 emails at a time, to anyone that individual has previously communicated with. And then they're going to wait, and they're going to see what money comes based on that email. And as I mentioned, this is a $1.7 billion problem. The money goes out the door, and we're seeing this in very large proportions across our footprint. Customers are losing money because they're at a financial loss. We've seen it range from anywhere from $5,000 all the way up to $50,000 in losses. And being able to recognize these threats is going to help make sure that you don't fall victim to business email compromise. So now I'm going to turn it back to Andy, and he's going to cover ransomware.
Thanks, Sarah. So what is ransomware? Ransomware makes the headlines all the time. We saw it in December when a network of hospitals got attacked from Vermont through upstate New York. We all hear about it, but what is it? Well, ransomware really is an extortion campaign. And it started out almost entirely as an extortion campaign that encrypted your data and your systems, preventing you from getting access to those until you paid a ransom in a cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. Well, in 2020, the whole concept of ransomware really evolved as all of us, meaning businesses in general, got smarter and started putting protections in place to guard against the traditional ransomware attack. The bad guys got smarter as well. And now what we're seeing is a double extortion scheme that occurs along with the encryption part of it. And I'm going to explain to you what all that is. But essentially, double extortion means that they're now stealing your data, your trade secrets, your intellectual property, and other confidential information before they encrypt your data and request the ransom. They use it as leverage to get you to pay ransom within a certain period of time under the threat of releasing that sensitive information to leak sites that they control. So let's talk about the industries most affected by the double extortion scheme in 2020. This data came out recently, last week, I believe, from Palo Alto's threat intelligence unit. It's called Unit 42. And they put together a list of industries that were most affected by this double extortion scheme. So what we're looking at here is a graph that shows the number of businesses within each segment that actually had confidential information posted to a leak site during a ransomware attack. So it might be kind of hard for you to see, so I'll summarize the top industries here. And I would venture to say that most of you on this call today are somewhere in this list of businesses. Leading the pool of victims here is the manufacturing industry, followed by professional and legal services, which I've personally seen and been involved in incident response related to ransomware attacks on law firms. The construction industry, not only with ransomware, but the construction industry actually is a prime target for business email compromise attacks. The high-tech industry, wholesale and retail, energy, and so on and so forth. So the double extortion scheme is real. And what that means for you is that in addition to putting in traditional ransomware controls, you also have to think about your data privacy and security and how access is gained to that data. You really need to know where your crown jewels are, where the confidential information is, where the trade secrets are, and you need to be able to put controls in place to monitor and protect against that. So let's talk about ransomware from the attacker's point of view. How does this all happen? Well, first of all, they identify their targets. And the trend in 2020 was really towards enterprise businesses because, frankly, the payoff is bigger. But I don't want you to misconstrue that trend to think that if you're a small or medium-sized business, you're somehow off the hook. Because really what it comes down to is whether or not you have a high operational mandate or the attackers determine that you're likely to pay a ransom. CrowdStrike's threat intelligence team has determined that the businesses most likely to be targeted have that high operational mandate. Who might fall in that category? Well, certainly hospitals, because they've been on the front lines of the pandemic for the last year, but manufacturing companies and really any business that is required to be up and running. Prime target for ransomware attack. After they target you, they try to gain access using one of the techniques that we've described today, and there are many more techniques out there, but those are the primary ones that we're seeing. And then they enter into what's called a pre-attack phase. In this pre-attack phase, they're inside your network, hands-on keyboard attack, and what they're doing is they're moving around your environment, trying to learn it and figure out where all of your critical systems and data are. We call that lateral movement in our world. The objective of lateral movement, in addition to finding your data, is actually to find the accounts in your environment, those user accounts that have access to the most things. So we call those privileged accounts. An attacker's ultimate goal is to compromise the most privileged accounts in your environment so they can have the most impact with the actual attack. So for example, a domain administrator account or somebody with elevated privileges, if they compromise that account, they can do whatever they want inside your network. Now, of course, this is all going to depend on the level of sophistication of the attacker and ultimately their goals. Once they go through that pre-attack phase, and I should say during that pre-attack phase, that's if they're going to do a double extortion technique, this is where they're going to steal that data from you and use it in the attack phase. So in the next phase of the attack is where the actual extortion comes. This is where they encrypt your data. This is where you come into work or you're sitting at your keyboard and everything goes dark and there's a ransom note that comes up on your screen and it says, we've encrypted all your files. If you want access, pay a ransom in the form of Bitcoin. Here's the amount. And if you don't pay us within 3 days, we're going to publish your sensitive data to a site, on the dark web. And then they wait for the money. And I will just say that if you're at this stage, most people identify the ransomware attack at the extortion phase because most businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, don't have adequate monitoring and detective controls in place. So if you're already at the extortion phase, the attack's already happened, this is where things get really chaotic. Let's just talk briefly about the 2020 trends. So groups that formerly focused on cybercrime, as I said, are now focusing on targeting bigger enterprises for bigger payoffs. But again, while CrowdStrike has identified that trend in their threat intelligence, don't assume that you're safe because you're a small or medium-sized business. Any business with that operational mandate, or according to the research that the attacker has done and their belief that you're likely to pay a ransom, you're a valuable target to them. But truthfully, the trend is upward towards bigger businesses simply because the payoff is greater. Now, globally, in 2020, ransom payments and data extortion became the most popular avenue for monetization of a cyber attack. And remember, while there certainly are attacks that are geared towards espionage and not monetization. For purposes of this series, we're really talking about those attacks geared towards monetization and financial gain. These cyber crime groups and these attack groups run their operations like businesses. They have funding, they've got teams with different skill sets, they have an organization, it's a business to them. In our footprint, in NBT's service area, truthfully, business email compromise is more prevalent. We see this on the order of several times a month in our customer base, where customers, email accounts are getting compromised, and sometimes NBT becomes the target of that, but other times it's your downstream customers. So I'm going to turn it over to Tara to talk about a really basic 5-step action plan, but it is actionable, and I would encourage you to review that and start acting on that tomorrow. Tara?
Thanks, Andy. So you've heard a lot in this short half an hour, but these threats are here and they will continue to be here. So following this 5-step cyber action plan today will help ensure your business does not fall victim. First, practice good cyber hygiene. This includes making sure your employees and yourself are changing passwords, scanning, patching your computers. Implement strong endpoint protection and a virtual private network for those remote devices. Ensuring for those employees that are working from home, you have the proper controls in place. Training. Train your employees to recognize phishing. If they know what to do, they're likely not to fall victim, and you'll know if those phishes are coming into your organization. Test your business continuity plan. As Andy mentioned, know where your data is and is your data backed up, and this will prevent you from becoming victim to ransomware. And then last, secure your cloud services. And I mean by that, your email accounts. If your email accounts are operating out in the cloud, be sure that you fully reviewed all of the security settings that are possible to make sure that you're able to spot and recognize if an account was attempted to be taken over. We want to thank you so much for joining the first Cyber Series. Please be sure to visit our Fraud Information Center. There's a wealth of information out there for you. It covers information we cover today, as well as the most current threats that we see. We look forward to seeing you for the rest of the 4 series.
Please join us again next Friday for week 2 of this series, Are You Covered? Proactive Controls You Need Now, hosted by NBT Insurance Agency President Tucker Lounsbury and NBT Bank's Director of Cash Management and Government Banking, Margaret Scoplianos. This concludes our webinar. Thank you and have a great day.